All right, this is part two of the same poem among school children. I ran out of time on the other one, so I don't know why. So I'm breaking it into two parts. I left off at stanza 1 to 4, so I'll go over 4 again and continue reading the poem. Then I'll begin my analysis of the entire poem. So, continuing, her present image floats into the mind. The quattrocinco finger fashion it, hollow of cheek, as though it drank the wind and took a mess of shadows for its meat. And I, though never of Lydian kind, had pretty plumage once. Enough of that, better to smile on all that smile and show there's a comfortable kind of old scarecrow. What a youthful mother, a shape upon her lap, honey of generation had betrayed, and that must sleep, shriek, struggle to escape, as recollection or the drug decide, would think her son, did she but see that shape, with 60 or more winters upon his head, a compensation for the pang of his birth, or the uncertainty of his setting forth. Plato thought nature but a spume that plays upon the ghostly paradigm of things. Soldier Aristotle played the Taurs upon the bottom of a king of kings. World-famous golden-dyed Pythagoras fingered upon a fiddlestick of strings with a star sang, and careless muses heard old clothes upon old sticks to scare a bird. Both nuns and mothers worship images, but those the candles light are not as those that animate a mother's reveries, but keep a marble or a bronze repose. And yet they too break hearts. Oh, presences that passion, piety, or affection knows, and that all heavenly glory symbolize. Oh, self-mockers of man's enterprises. Labor is blossoming or dancing where the body is not bruised to pleasure soul, nor beauty born out of its own despair, nor blear-eyed wisdom out of midnight oil. O chestnut tree, great-rooted blossomer, are you the leaf, the blossom, or the bowl? O body swayed to music, O brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance? All right, so it is confusing, and I'm going to go back now and walk through it again. So stanza 1, I don't think you have any trouble with that. That's straightforward, okay? Stanza 2, this is where his mind starts to wander, and he thinks of Leda, all right? And that's Leda's body. I dream of Lydian body, but it's really Maud Gonne, Gone, his beloved, okay, the one he loved all his life. And he compares her to Leda. So he says, I dream of a Lydian body. That would be Maud Gonne, bent above a sinking fire. And here's something you don't know anything about, and I wouldn't have known, only that you have to kind of like dig it out and find out what he's talking about. He's saying that somewhere back when they were young, Maud Gonne told him of an event that happened to her, and she was scolded harshly by a teacher, reproved, okay, for some trivial event, and she was crushed. She was really upset and cried and turned to him for pity, to share, to commiserate in her suffering, all right, as children. So that changed some childish day to tragedy for her. And she told me about it. And it seemed that her sharing that misery and seeking my comfort, that our two natures blended together, make the rhyme event blend, into a sphere that I talked about, Plato's spheres, and that she and he, that would be Maud Gonne, and he were the two halves of the one sphere of useful sympathy that I shared with her. And, he has cherished that moment all his life. Here he's 61 years old, and he's thinking back to when they were probably 9 or 12 years old, and she shared that event with him. And then his, what we're talking about here. And to the yolk and the white of one shell, that would be the sphere, Plato's myth, the story of the creation of people. All right. So he says, I dream about that, and I dream of her, and wondering what she might have looked like among these children at their age. See, that's what he gets into here. And thinking of that fit of grief or rage that she shared. And I look upon one child or the other there, and I wonder if she stood so at that age, if she looked like them, because obviously we change from childhood to adulthood. We don't look the same, obviously. Okay, so he's wondering what she looked like back then, when he probably did not know her then, but he did know her in this story of the tragedy when they were a little bit older than this age. So then he brings up, the daughters of the swan can share a similar heritage, every paddler's heritage, and that would be like the ugly duckling growing into a beautiful swan. And he wonders about looking at the children, wondering if she herself had that same color upon her cheek or hair, and thereupon my heart is driven wild. Why? Because he sees her standing before him in the classroom. Okay, so the man's not losing his mind. I mean, don't forget, he's taking us on a journey of his mind. She stands before me as a living child. Okay, now her present image, though, now as a 60-something-year-old woman, floats into my mind. And when he says quattrocinco, he's talking about the Italian way of speaking of the centuries. So that would be the 1400s. We would say the 15th century. But he says, did some 1400 artist of the Renaissance fashion through its fingers a portrait to make her look as she looks in a portrait. And what does that look? Hollow of cheek, dark, almost as if she drank the wind. She had no nourishment to her body, okay, and ate a mess of shadows for her meat. So she's very thin and gaunt looking now, okay, as a 60-year-old. And then he speaks of himself, and though I never was of the Lydian kind, leader in the swan, I once had pretty plumage myself, okay, fine head of hair and all that kind of thing. And then he says to himself, come on, enough of that, all right? And then he shakes himself back into the present, and he says it's better to look on all that smiling face, the children looking at him, and show there is a comfortable kind of old scarecrow. So he calls himself a scarecrow, much the same as he did about Plato and Aristotle and Pythagoras. All right. Now he brings up an entirely new idea here. And, you wonder where these things come from. All of a sudden, he's talking about a totally different topic. He says, and there's a question. See the question down here. He says, what youthful mother did see but that shape? If she only saw the shape of the infant in her lap, 60 years later, with 60 winters upon his head, what youthful mother would consider it a compensation for the pang of birth, that she suffered bringing this child into the world and not knowing what kind of future it held? So it's a question, what mother would think it worthwhile to birth a child if she could foresee what the child would turn out to when he was Yeats' age, 61, okay? So that's what that is. That's a long question. And then he brings in another idea here about this escaping and drugs and things like that. So here he's referring to Wordsworth, and Wordsworth's ode to intimations on immortality. He wrote a poem in which he talks about, when people come into this world, they come from heaven. They leave another world behind them, and they trail clouds of glory behind them, and they have to readjust to this world that we live in now, leaving behind the world of wonderful happiness in heaven, all right? So that's down here, and as a result, a child, to forget that world, sleeps all the time, or screams and shrieks and cries, or struggles to escape this world to get back into its old world. And how does it do it? By drinking a drug of forgetfulness of the world behind, okay? So that's all in there, and you would not know that. I mean, so he makes you work at this. He assumes that, we will do the research here to figure out what he's talking about. But it's kind of unfair. He just throws it out there, assuming that, okay, here we go. You've got to know what this is all about. All right, so he says, what youthful mother, a shape upon her lap as an infant, honey of generation. He's talking about sex here, the sexual urge had betrayed. In other words, generation after generation, we have the urge to procreate. And it's a honey, because it's an urge, the strongest urge we have, that of sex. Honey of each generation is betrayed by it, okay? And must sleep, shriek, struggle to escape as recollection, or the drug decide, would think her son did, but she could see that shape 60 or more winters on his head, a compensation for the pang of his birth, or the uncertainty of his setting forth, not knowing what he's going to accomplish. Now, here he gets into philosophy. Plato thought nature but a spume that plays upon the ghostly paradigm of things. Now, what he means by that is Plato said that the real world is in the spiritual. It's a world of forms, like a form of a table, a form of a dog, a form of a clock, a form of grass. And the things that we see in this world, tangible things, that conform to the images in the spiritual world. So he creates the world as it exists in the world of the spirit. And we see things in this world and we say, oh, that's a table, because it conforms to what a real table is like in the world of the spirit. So if it doesn't conform, it's not a table, okay? Then you have the whole syllogism, all things that have this, and then some things have that. So the lower part, some do not have this, is a false statement, because if all things have it, you can't say some don't, okay? So that he's talking about Plato here, and that's a whole realm of philosophy. And then Aristotle, he was a teacher of Alexander the Great, so he refers to him as the King of Kings, and he was his tutor. So when Alexander was a child, he whacked him on his butt, okay? He played the taws upon the bottom of a King of Kings, and taws is ropes. Another word for rope would be, a cat of nine tails kind of thing, stripes. So he whacked the child on his rear end. Why? So he would learn. It's discipline, that nothing in learning comes easy. You have to work at it, okay? So that's what he's referring to there. And Pythagoras, world-famous golden Pythagoras, fingered upon a fiddlestick of strings because he heard the music in the spheres of the universe, what a star sang and the careless muses heard. Oh, and then he sums it all up saying, these great philosophers, they're nothing but scarecrows like myself, old clothes upon sticks to scare a bird. In other words, at the end of all of their achievement in old age, what does it amount to but being old sticks wearing old clothes to scare birds? So they're all scarecrows. So that's kind of a pretty bleak look at what life, has for us in the end. Now he gets into mothers and nuns, because the nun is beside him. And what do they worship? Both nuns and mothers worship images. The mother worships the image of her child, seeing it as one day becoming famous or something. And the nun worships through the candlelight in the church statuary and artwork, all right, of the saints, like the Blessed Mother holding the baby Jesus. So these are things that animate a mother's reveries, but keep a marble or a bronze repose for the nun. And yet, both of these break hearts as well. Okay, why? Because the child grows up to be something other than the mother expected, so it changes. And these images, these icons, don't change. Okay, so but they're representatives of the spiritual world, though. But looking at them from a material point of view, they don't change. So therefore, both break hearts. And now he addresses presences like the spirit world. It's like an ode now. He's saying, "Oh, presences that passion, piety, and affection knows." So passion for the mothers, piety for the nuns, and now he includes himself, affection for my Maud Gorn, okay? And all that heavenly glory symbolized. Oh, self-born mockers of man's enterprise. That's a very powerful line. Our enterprises are the things that we seek, we chase after, and we are mocked by them when we attain them because they amount to nothing. Oh, self-born mockers of man's enterprise. So he's leading up to the final stanza, and he has to have some solution. He has to have a resolution to this issue. He's talking about old age. He's talking about beauty. And he's saying, what is the meaning of it all? And if life isn't, if it doesn't offer anything more than I'm saying, then life isn't worth living. Okay? So now he says, don't forget, oh, presences, labor is blossoming or dancing where the body is not bruised to pleasure's soul. The body is bruised by its labor, achieving what it seeks, like the next line down here, bleary-eyed wisdom out of the midnight oil. That's what I was talking about in part one when I said, you have to stay up late because learning doesn't come easily, okay? It's not something that we are given without some work behind it, nor beauty born out of its own despair. So this is a key line too, because here he's talking about despair, and his despair is over not gaining the love of Maud Gorn. So that's his despair. And what is the result of that despair? His work. He creates a thing of beauty. So here we have beauty born out of despair. In other words, he has created something very beautiful. This poem of 8, stanzas, and that wouldn't exist had he not had his heartbreak by Maud Gorn. Okay, so things come out of hard work, and now he goes into this, and he's talking about living things. Okay, and he says, "Oh, chestnut tree, great-rooted blossomer, are you leaf, blossom, or bowl?" The bowl is like the root, the base of the tree, or the blossoms of the tree, or the leaves of the tree. What are you? And of course, it's all of those things. You can't separate them. They are all part of the one. And that's what he ends the poem saying, O body swayed to music, O brightening glance, something that gets brighter and brighter. How can we know the dancer from the dance? That is the most important line of the entire poem. In other words, you cannot separate it from the thing. Like everything that he has achieved in life is his dance. And he had to change the dance as he grew with each new circumstance that came into his life. He had to change. And that changing is the dance. But he is the choreographer. In other words, he's creating his own dance. And therefore, we are the product of what we make of our lives. And you can't separate it from me. In other words, myself is different from yourself because I look at my life, and everything that has happened in my life has been a result of my dealing with those things that came into my life and how I dealt with them, and that is the dance. So I am both the dancer and the dance itself. So you look at my life, and that is the dance. All right, so that's what that's about. So let's go down here now. And I already did stanza 1. Stanza 2, Yeats changes the scene from within the classroom to within the mind of the narrator. He's thinking about his beloved Maud Gonne, whom he had wished to marry, but was unrequited in his affection for her. Looking into the faces of the children in the classroom, he's reminded of a day long ago when Maud had shared a youthful, intimate tragedy with him involving a trivial event in which she had been blamed for some misdeed and sought his sympathy. Yeats remembers it for the warmth of affection it had brought to him and describes it as our two natures blent into one sphere from youthful sympathy. The recollection of the scene never left him and affected his lifelong longing for her love. Here he alludes to Plato's parable of the two beings hatched in one egg, cloven at birth, suggesting that Maud is his lifelong soulmate. Stanza 3, momentarily leaving this reverie, he now gazes into the faces of the children, all girls, and wonders if Maud had looked like them at that stage of life, and wonders if she stood so at that age. Then in the